All right, hello class. This is an accompanying narrated PowerPoint slideshow for you with regard to power in Western society. And the two theorists that I've chosen here are both non-classical theorists. And the first one is Alexis de Tocqueville, and he's a Frenchman. And then the second one is Stephen Lukes, and Lukes is not a Frenchman. So we will go through this, and both of these two professors, gents, writers, scholars, have a different view on power. Not completely opposed to each other, but just kind of a different take. One is a little bit more historically contextualized, and the other one is a little bit more contemporary. All right. It should be noted that Stephen Lukes is a little bit controversial in academia, but I think very, very applicable to how we're looking at power. So Alexis de Tocqueville, 1805 to 1859 was his lifespan. A little picture of him. He was a wealthy barrister's son, so he had the cultural and social capital to be able to spend his time reading and studying. And he was very interested in power and how power plays out in populace. One of the reasons for this was because his experiences in France leading up to some social unrest there, and eventually the French Revolution. They were having lots of trouble with people in crime and deviance, and they were trying to figure out how to manage it. And at the time, the United States was learning very well how to efficiently jail people, which we still do today. So France decided to send him over. The King of France said, "Go on over and figure out how America is doing such a good job with jailing their citizens." So that was a fake study. He tricked them and said that that's what he was going to study. I love him for this. He actually came over and he was more interested in how Americans function together in a civil society manner in terms of how we augmented our experiences as a country outside of government. Um, and so he wrote extensively on civil society, and now we call them civil society organizations. And those are basically things that are like not-for-profit organizations, and things that are, help the Salvation Army, these kinds of things, which we have been massively oriented towards community involvement, because a lot of people theorize, and this is what Tocqueville was putting forth, that we were doing that to overcome the lack of governmental presence in taking care of us as a country. He also was very instrumental in talking about the more full role that American women had in civil society. And a lot of that is compared to European society. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that American women were getting out of the house more because it was very much of a wilderness existence, and literally the infrastructure of our country was not as set in place, and our culture was not as gelled, so to speak, as European culture. And so women were another hand around the house to help out with stuff way outside of just childbearing. I shouldn't say just childbearing, but way outside of simply being childbearing and rearing. So he's kind of instrumental in that. I mean, he was very in identifying this, and given a lot of credit towards the role of the redefinition of gender roles during the time. He also was the first person to effectively note that we give a lot of credit towards self-efficacy and what a person can do, how they perform, so that we were a meritocracy. In other words, our values are based upon the merit of someone's skills. being a blacksmith had a higher social ranking in the United States than it would in Europe at the time, and that genes and genealogy and royal ties and status and titles were much of a bigger deal for the Europeans than they were for this new American society, because it was just like, hey, we don't care what your title is, what can you do? So um, he wrote and published a wonderful bit of work called Democracy in America. It was published in 1842. So that's Tocqueville. This is a great quote here that we have, a little excerpt from him that says, "The American Republic will endure until the day Congress discovers that it can bribe the public with the public's money." Interesting quote. So obviously our Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate, both of those things comprise the Congress. They get our money to spend. I mean, that's where they get their money, is from our taxes. And when the government becomes so big that it can divvy out our own money to us in certain ways, then he doesn't think that we have a republic anymore. So in that way, he's kind of conservative. Small government is kind of what he's espousing through that. And I'm unpacking this little quote here for you guys because there may be an assignment where you guys have to, in fact, there will be, because this is online, where you guys will have to try to decode some of his other quotes, which are here. I'm going to ask you to, to try to, with your best guess, try to, nothing more than your critical reasoning and what you know of the background of his works now, very quickly, try to take a guess, take an educated guess at what some of these mean, and I'll have that in the discussion prompt for you guys. So let's go to another wonderful dude here, which is Stephen Lukes. He's still alive. He was born in 1941. Doesn't he just look like the professor here? I don't know what happened to his eye in this picture, but he's a pretty prolific writer. He publishes a lot. Very, very famous in terms of his definition of power. And his heyday was in the early 70s. He's best known, still controversial theory. It's a radical view of power. And it can be simply stated. It claims that there's three dimensions of power. The first is overt power, and this is what we typically think about with power. This is, exhibited in a presence of conflict, where power consists in winning. You just beat the other person, and then you exert your power. It could be through war, it could be through diplomacy, it could be through economic sanctions. You exert your power, you beat the other person, the other country, whatever. You are the winner. So that's the first, most obvious. The second one is covert power, and consists of controlling in what gets decided. But more importantly, he points out that certain organizations, maybe premeditatively, maybe not, maybe maybe being aware of it, maybe not, ignore or deflect certain grievances and certain problems and choose to focus on others. And, we can see this happen in academia, certainly high levels of academia. Certain subjects and topics are not to be looked at as favorable, and others are. And so this is an exertion of power. And there's sometimes a collective mindset about, what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. But by excluding some issues and only addressing and focusing on others, it's a way of covertly, not giving people equal amounts of footing with regard to what it is that they want to focus on or study in terms of conflict. And then the third one is probably his most famous, and that is the power to shape desires and beliefs. That's the smartest way of all to exert power and avert conflict and grievances. If you can tell people what they should want and how they should behave, then you got them where you want them. And this is very much based in studies of colonialism. You shape the desires and the culture of a people, and they won't revolt against you. They will agree with what you think the values should be. And this is an interesting concept, and this is just one that's very controversial, because a lot of people say that in a free society, the people create their own values. But Stephen Luke's, he's putting forth that values are presented to us by those that are in the dominant ideology, or those who are in power, whether it be government or whether it be corporations and corporate interests in marketing, especially in the United States. So that's Stephen Luke's. Has a very quick review. He also was very instrumental in coining and furthering the concept of agency. And so agency, he defined as the cause of this, or the support of something happening. And so his idea was that individual agency is that you are the cause, or you are the impetus, or the pivotal part of what you do, and how you behave and how you react and what your values are. That lies with the individual. Whereas he took this idea of structure at a macro level, with social forces and social control, and turned it into structural agency, and that is that you really don't have as much power as you think, that the cause and the supporter of your behaviors lies in your relation to the dominant structures around you. Institutions, schools, government, corporations, these kinds of things control you, and that the agency doesn't lie within you, but it's out of your control. It's a structural issue. Um, so you can think of this, you can define, you could take in any topic you happen to think about. It's good to try to view from these two standpoints. How much does the individual control their own behavior and reaction and belief systems, and how much is given to us by structure? It's not my job to keep my opinion from you guys. I would suggest that most issues are a combination of both of these two, but that some social issues may have more of a root in one than the other. I don't think they're ever mutually exclusive, but that there's you can go either way, and sometimes things could be leaning towards more structural agency and sometimes individual agency. Anyways, this is Luke's deal here. Really put it forth, and took it a step further. You can try to think for yourself. Take an issue and think about structural agency and individual agency, and go from there. It's a good exercise to do. And then this is the McCutcheon deal, and you can look at this. This is a lawsuit that's currently being reviewed by the Supreme Court with regard to how much an individual can donate to political candidates, and whether we in a free society should have limits in how much rich or wealthy people can donate towards supporting candidacy. And this whole idea of corporations as individuals and all those things, this comes up in this, and it's a government website, and you can read the actual in the actual lawsuit itself, as it is recorded from our Supreme Court in a primary source. So if you've ever wanted to see a Supreme Court case in its written form, and it's readable, you should be able to read it and understand some of it. But that's just optional if you guys want to take a look at that. Okay, so that is Luke's and Tocqueville for power as far as we're concerned, and I will see you guys next time.